James Michael Moss and his wife Margaret Ann, living in the Holman family home, raised their 6 children who lived beyond infancy, 3 boys and 3 girls. The Moss children planted a row of pecan trees near the house one day at the suggestion of their teacher. These grand old trees are still standing. James Michael Moss was an innovative farmer and a leader in agriculture.
He was rotating his crops before people ever heard of rotating crops. Rotating crops is plant cotton in this field one year and maybe corn in it the next year and peanuts in it the next year or whatever. It kept rotating your crops. It didn't poverty your land like if you plant the same crop every time. He practiced that, and also he was a oat seed breeder behind the old barn out here that he built. That rich, very rich land, he would mark him off a square out there, so 15 feet wide, and he would break the oat seed comes in doubles, two to the connection. He would break the seed apart and plant it a foot apart, and he'd do that whole plot like that, 12 by 12 or whatever, and he would harvest those seed, the better parts of them, and plant them the next year, and he sold oat seed.
He was recognized by Clemson University for his improved oat breeds. Known for his bright, twinkling eyes, kind smile, infectious laugh, and erect carriage, he was almost always seen with an umbrella, walking cane, and a cigar. He loved animals and the outdoors. Dove hunting, fishing, and playing the card game known as setback were some of his favorite activities. The Shady Grove Methodist Church had been built on land owned by James Michael Moss's father-in-law, Adam Holman. James signed over the title of that land to the church. When he was a very old man, James was invited back to the Citadel to receive an honorary Doctor of Science degree for his work developing hybrid oat strains, which became a major crop in South Carolina.
When Grandfather was 89 years old, General Summerall was the commandant at the Citadel at that time, and he recalled him to come back and get a diploma. And they gave him a doctor's degree in science because he was an excellent farmer. I can remember as a little boy, going down for that service at the Citadel, and I have the mantle that you wear around you. He gave me that. And James Moss, my cousin, got the certificate. Anyway, he divvied all the things up to the older cousins, and I was very fortunate to get the mantle.
His wife, Margaret Ann Holman Moss, was a straightforward, hard-working woman. She was also known to be quite smart and very witty. All of their children who grew to adulthood graduated from college. Their 4th child was Margaret Holman Moss. She married Albert Chandler Watson in 1898. Albert Chandler, the son of Michael Wimberly and Molly King Watson, was the 2nd child of a large family and grew up in Ridge Spring. Hattie Urbana Williams and her husband Edwin Lucius Culler were also raising a large family. Edwin Lucius, who was a young boy when Sherman's men came to his house, had been left a large estate when his father died.
And Jacob sent all of his children to college up until the war between the states. And he left in his will $1,000 to take, and $1,000 is a lot of money in those days, and to take care of the education of his other children, who were not old enough for college. But of course, all of this money was in Confederate bonds, Confederate money. And after the end of the war, it was worth nothing.
On account of the Civil War and the difficult period of Reconstruction which followed, he was denied a college education, but being ambitious and of studious habits, he acquired a very thorough education and was remarkably well informed on many subjects. He was a man of extraordinary executive ability. He was a friend to the poor and needy, and was a ready contributor to every worthy cause.
Edwin met Hattie Williams when she came over from Blackville to attend a camp meeting. He first noticed her beautiful long hair and was smitten.
And he saw my grandmother, who was later my grandmother. She had hair down to her waist. And he says, that's the girl I'm going to marry. Even though he was engaged to somebody else at that time. Well, he went to Blackville on horseback to see her. And in 2 years, sure enough, they were married.
Hattie Williams' mother had died when Hattie was only 8. From then on, Hattie did all of her own sewing, took care of her brothers, and made suits for them. Her father remarried, bringing to the family 5 half-siblings whom she helped take care of and love almost as a mother as well as a sister. She was 19 years old when she and Edwin Lucius Culler were married. They had a large farm of 757 acres and a mill pond with a sawmill, a grist mill, and a cotton gin.
Edwin, my grandfather, and Myrtle's grandfather, grew a lot of things, and they grew their own corn and wheat and whatnot, and ground it in his mill. And they had their own forest, so they could cut the lumber for whatever their needs were. And they had the cotton and the cotton gin, but they also had big orchards, a lot of peaches and apples and pecan trees. And sometime there would be a lot of helpers around the house sitting there peeling lots and lots of peaches when it was peach season. And Mama would tell me about that Grandmama Hattie had helpers, and they were all sitting around peeling peaches, and they'd can the peaches so they could eat them throughout the winter. Then they had a little building outside of the house that was the dairy in the yard where they kept the milk and the butter.
They also grew grapes and had a large vegetable garden where they grew many kinds of vegetables along with watermelons and cantaloupes.
They didn't butcher cows, I don't think. I hadn't heard of that, but I heard they're butchering the chickens. They had chickens for meat and then also for eggs, and they would butcher the hogs. But they belonged to a meat club or beef club, and somebody would come around in a wagon selling big cuts of beef, and there would be a netting over the beef to keep the flies off. But I guess somebody somewhere would butcher the beef, and then they'd go around and sell portions of it to everybody, and it was kind of like you had a subscription.
Edwin was also an accomplished carpenter. He built their large, spacious home. It was said that he planned the whole thing in his head, went to the woods and cut the logs to the proper length, and hauled them to the sawmill to be sawed into boards. They were a religious family.
And he had what they called a family altar at home. This didn't mean a physical altar that he built because he was a carpenter. This meant that he had a time every day that he would read the Bible to the children and pray. It was a daily devotional, but they referred to it in those days in church as establishing a family altar. That was the expression.
Edwin and Hattie had 12 children, 4 of whom died in infancy. After the death of her first child, Julia Sarah, who was named for both her grandmothers, Hattie wrote this poem.
My darling little angel, she is not dead but sleepeth, not lost but gone before. Thou art lost to us, but heaven now has one angel more. Farewell, blessed baby, may thy memory teach our trusting hearts to wait till time is o'er. Then may we grateful own an angel's speech, not lost but gone before. Written by a heartbroken mother, December 22nd, 1881.
Hattie fell down the stairs during one pregnancy, and a pair of twins was born prematurely and did not survive. When their second son, Hayne, was 22 years old, he went to the Jamestown Exposition of 1907 in Norfolk, Virginia. He apparently contracted typhoid fever while there, for he fell ill shortly after he returned home. According to the care of the day, to feed a cold and starve a fever, he was denied good, nourishing food and died from the disease. It was said of his mother Hattie that this great sorrow almost crushed her and left its mark upon her brow. Their oldest son, Edwin Jr., was born in 1882. He was at Limestone Methodist Church with his uncle when the great earthquake of 1886 hit.
It was in Charleston, but we felt tremors all over the place. And they were at church that night. And Uncle Bob told Uncle Ed, he said, Ed, Says, climb out the window. Says we got to go home. Says, the world is coming to an end.
Edwin and Hattie's home was on the traveled road to Limestone Church, where they were faithful and dedicated members.
And one of our other first cousins, June, said she remembered our grandfather standing up at the end of the service and said, all of you have a long buggy ride back home and we are the closest house, so come by our house and have dinner with us. And nearly every Sunday they had extra people. They had a big family of their own, but they'd have extra people that would take him up on that invitation. So they were very generous and very hospitable.
Hattie and hired help would spend all day Saturday cooking in anticipation of feeding a crowd of people on Sunday. Many who came for dinner would also stay for supper.
An elderly man said, you don't know me, says, but my name is George Abnett. And says, I used to go to your grandmama's house almost every Sunday. And he said, Aunt Hattie was just, and half the people in the community called her Aunt Hattie, even though she wasn't the aunt. She said, Aunt Hattie was just so good to all of us. Said she loved young children. He said, I spent many a wonderful Sunday afternoon at her house.
Mama was a very lovable woman, gentle and kind to everyone. Her bright and cheerful disposition endeared her to all. The young as well as the old sought her home and loved her company, for she had the rare gift of attracting them and making everybody feel so happy and welcome to her home. She possessed many virtues, but unselfishness was her outstanding characteristic. Her whole life was spent in loving service to her family and others, never thinking of herself. I never heard her and Papa quarrel. She never failed to express her appreciation for every little act of kindness shown her. Annie Urbana Color.
The whole family was musical, and they played a variety of musical instruments and loved to sing together. After dinner on Sundays, they would all go into the parlor and play and sing. The youngest child of Edwin and Hattie was born in 1906. Her name was Annie Urbana Color. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Benedict Color, who had come over from Europe on the Bilander Oliver 171 years earlier. She is the descendant of 2 different Schomloffel sisters and 2 different Nagley sisters. When Annie was 14 years old, her father Edwin went by train to Columbia for an operation. He had been ill for a few weeks.
Granddaddy had to have an operation, and I really don't remember what kind, but any kind of operation was serious in those days. And he had to go to Columbia to have it. So he was on the train going to Columbia, and he met one of his old black playmates when he was a boy. See, now, the blacks and the whites played together when they were children, see. And they were so glad to see each other, they just hugged each other, because they'd been a long time since they'd seen each other.
A few days later, Edwin was prepped for surgery. Before the operation began, he recited his boyhood prayer.
Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take.
That was his last trip, because he died on the operating table. And as I say, this was in 1920, and operations, are not the same as they are today.
He was one of the most substantial members of his community, and a great throng of people attended his funeral at Limestone Methodist Church, where he was a lifelong and active member. Albert Chandler Watson, the son of Michael Wimberly Watson and Molly King Watson, married Margaret Holman Moss in 1898. Albert entered a business college and studied the cotton business in Savannah, Georgia. He took a job as a cotton broker with Alex Sprunt and Company, which was a large cotton exchange company based in Wilmington, North Carolina. He and his wife had 2 sons, and in 1907 they moved from Ellery, South Carolina, to Orangeburg. Albert Watson became a city councilman and was in charge of the Orangeburg Fire Department and the Department of City Water and Light.
Mr. Watson gave much time to those two branches of city government and raised them to a high stage of efficiency. He was always interested in anything to advocate the city. His easy grasp of problems coming before the city was phenomenal. T.O.S. Dibble, City Clerk and Treasurer.
Albert Watson was also an outstanding insurance man, being president of A.C. Watson and Company, which was at one time the largest fire insurance company in the state of South Carolina. In addition, he was on the advisory board of the Salvation Army and was a successful farmer as well. At one time, he was even engaged in banking. He was an active member of the First Baptist Church, where he was treasurer and taught Sunday school. Rarely a week went by that he didn't pay a visit to each member of his Sunday school class outside of church. Albert and Margaret Watson's second son, Albert Chandler Watson II, was born in 1906. He was the sixth generation of Watsons born in the United States. 1 year before he married Annie Urbana Culler, his father, Albert Chandler Watson Sr., died just 24 hours after suffering a heart attack. The doctors, thinking it was a case of indigestion, decided bleeding him was the proper course of action. He was only 53 years old. The funeral procession started from their home on Calhoun Street. The fire bell of the city tolled in memory of the departed councilman who was in charge of that department. The huge hook and ladder truck of the Orangeburg Fire Department was loaded with floral arrangements and had its place in the procession. The First Baptist Church was crowded, and many friends were compelled to remain outside.